Hi everyone, I'm Nikita Doshi. I'm part of the NHRD Bangalore Executive Committee and I also work at Publicis Sapient in the learning team, and I welcome you all to this very interesting June monthly meet. I would request all of you if you can view this on speaker mode, so that whenever we are spotlighting it, you can see the speakers. Request you all to be on mute. If you have any questions, we have a separate Q&A section, and you can unmute your line and ask your questions at that point in time. But before we get started with this interesting monthly meet, I would like to take a couple of minutes to just talk about a national HRD network. So as you all know, and most of you would be aware, NHRD is a non-profit platform to enable growth amongst HR professionals. We have quite a lot of interesting offerings. We would request all of you to join the NHRD tribe. There are multiple things that you get access to becoming an NHRD member. You get access to journals, webinars, podcasts, sessions, a lot of these interesting learning programs and discounts on certifications. It's also a great way to build your network. In the last 4 years, have been associated with this platform. I think this has been one big plus for me as well. And you get these avenues like monthly meets, conferences, and HR showcases to interact as well as to learn. Bangalore chapter has over 2,500 members, and overall at an India level, we have 13,000 plus members. It has multiple initiatives, like I mentioned earlier, thought leadership programs, learning programs, Confluence. We do a lot of stuff, a lot of interesting work with the students, and a number of webinars, tweet chats, and a lot of interesting, engaging stuff as well as on social media. Bangalore chapter was awarded the best chapter for 3 consecutive years, 2014, 15, 16, and again in 18. Like I said earlier, we would encourage you all to become members. To become a member, you can either write to membership@nhrdbangalore.com or visit www.nhdbangalore.com. My colleague Mitch will actually share this link as well on the chat window. We as an executive committee, our term of 2 years is going to come to an end next month. So we are going to have an AGM, and the AGM is on July 17th, and all the NHRD members will receive details about the AGM and election process in a day or so. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. A lot of you might have seen work happen with respect to the entire NHRD Mind Matters campaign. We launched and curated this interesting toolkit, and I'll share this link on the chat window. We've had about 1.75 million people access this toolkit, unique people download this toolkit so far. It has multiple interesting practices, tools, and tips, both as a person who's dealing with mental health issues as well as a person who needs to have a conversation. We've also done a bunch of interesting sessions, and tomorrow we are closing this entire NHRD Mind Matters series with an interesting panel of senior corporate leaders. So if you're interested, do register for that. This is tomorrow from 6:30 to 7:30, where we have CXOs, head corporate HR leaders who are going to share their stories around mental well-being. And we are very, very active on social media. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, as well as our YouTube channel. This particular interesting thought leadership meet is also streamed live on YouTube. So if you want to view it later, you can also view this later. So with this, I would now like to set context about this interesting session and give you some details and then introduce our facilitators for today. So this thought leadership meeting is about deconstructing inclusivity using theater. In an increasingly diverse workforce, it becomes even more important to truly understand the nature of that workforce and how to maximize its potential. Diversity, even today, is looked at through a rather limited lens, usually limiting discussions to gender, race, and maybe sexuality. But the spectrum of diversity is much wider and more complex. A proper understanding of the spectrum and the diversity and multiplicities of these identities and personalities that even one single person brings to the table is imperative. This session that we bring to you today will examine the various lacunae still present in the inclusion work in the business world, and also help our participants who are joining us today to get a more holistic picture about the wide spectrum of today's diversity and biases. This is going to leverage theater, and I'm looking forward to this. It's a theater-based experiential approach to explore it in a virtual format. This would be facilitated by Kaizad Kotwal and Rajita Joshi, who will actually illustrate the concrete advantages of a more inclusive workplace. To introduce, and you can see Rajita and Kaizad on screen. So Rajita has been an entrepreneur, business head, a professional coach, assessor, and trainer facilitator for over 20 plus years. Accomplished in the use of Hogan assessment for leadership development, Rajita has assessed and given feedback to 250 plus leaders using Hogan tools. I have been fortunate to have been certified in Hogan by Rajita herself, and I've also attended some of her sessions. She's also the founder and director of Hrd Network. Welcome, Rajita, and thank you for agreeing to do this for us. We also have Kaizad Kotwal. Kaizad is an Emmy Award winner, having spent 24 plus years in the US working in theater, film, in various roles and capacities. Kaizad has seamlessly excelled in multiple and parallel careers of media and education in last 20 years and more. In India, some of his well-known films, and you would have seen him, include Khoobsurat with Sonam Kapoor, In Car with Arjun Rampal, Airlift with Akshay Kumar, and multiple other movies. There is a long list, and you can go on the website to look at the whole list of the movies. Kaizad also started one of India's premier theatre companies, Poor Box Productions, in 1996 in partnership with Mahabanu Kotwal. He's conducted multiple workshops and sessions at all levels. We will also be joined later by our artists who are going to enact some of these theatre monologues. We have with us Mahabanu Kotwal, who is a very famous actor, director, and producer in movies, films, television, and theatre. And we're also joined by Swati Das, who is a theatre and film actress. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Rajita and Kaizad, to take it forward.
Sure, and thank you so much, Nikita. It's a pleasure for both Kaizad and I to be here today. I will let Kaizad speak briefly and then take over from me, but I'd really like to thank all of you to be here today and to give us this opportunity, because the vision and purpose of setting up Hrd Network for Kaizad and I, and we are in it together as partners, is that we would like to propel and really support the voice movement for anyone who feels, senses, or becomes marginalized in a collective environment. And that can come from appearance, from identity, it can come from race, age, it can come from person's mental, physical abilities, disabilities. The ultimate goal is to create awareness and bring an inclusive approach to collective living, whether it is in the corporate world or in general in society. And we use executive and leadership coaching and theater-based learning to do that. And so therefore, I'm very happy to have my friend and partner Kaizad here with me today, and I'm going to hand it over to him. Kaizad, all yours.
Thank you so much, Rajita. Thank you for having us, and welcome to everybody. Before we really start anything, just to sort of get a baseline assessment to help us forward with this session, Rajita, if you can go to the first slide. So what you see over here is a spectrum, which on the left-hand side says always visible. In the center, sometimes visible, and on the right, always visible. If you have a sheet of paper or a pen and a pen close by, if you could just note these 3 points on the spectrum down on that sheet of paper, I'll give you just a couple of seconds to do that. Again, always visible, sometimes visible, and always invisible. from left to right. Okay. Now, Rajita, if you can just go to the next list. I have in front of you now a list of identity attributes. This is not a all-inclusive list by any means, but it's a sort of a starting point. What we'd like you to do in the next 2 to 3 minutes is pretend that an individual has walked into your room. And before you say anything to this person, before the other person says anything to you, what aspects of this person's identity, what attributes do you think are always visible? Do you think maybe sometimes visible? Or do you then see as always invisible? So when we see somebody for the first time, without having any interaction, what is it about that person that we feel is always up on the surface? What do we feel that may be not so clear? So that's sometimes visible, sometimes invisible. And what do we see that is almost never sort of ascertainable based on that person standing in front of us? So if you could just take 2 to 3 minutes, and as many of these as you can put down on that spectrum where you feel they belong. So if you feel, for instance, that gender is always visible, then put that under that category. If you feel another attribute is sometimes visible, sometimes invisible, put that in the center. If you feel that another attribute is always invisible, put that at that end of the spectrum. So take a couple of minutes to do this exercise for yourself, and we'll then move forward.
I think it'll help if maybe after a couple of minutes, Nikita, you could check for people to just put in chat if they're okay to move on, and then we can move to the poll question.
Yeah, I'll just request everyone, once you're done, if you can just type on the chat window, done, that will help us.
And again, try and fit in as many of these as you can. Certainly all don't have to. And again, remember that you know nothing about this individual. They know nothing about you. You've never met, you've never exchanged a word. And also for these attributes, it's your understanding of what these attributes mean or stand for, or however you want to interpret them.
Once you're done with all of this, if you can just type on the chat window, done, it will just help us. I've got a couple of responses done. We'll just probably wait for another 30 seconds.
Sure.
And do reply to all. Just request that. I think most people are done.
Super.
So stop, Nikita, and you can run the poll question.
So I'll request everyone to go on menti.com. You can take your mobiles and type menti.com. And this is the code that you see on the screen. You can type it, and probably Mitch, if you can just type it on the chat window, this code, and you'll see this question, just respond to that. Rajita, you want to add anything else?
No, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, so this is a poll question based on the exercise that you've just finished. Take a look at what you have in front of you on that spectrum and assess where most of those attributes have clustered under, whether it's always invisible, sometimes visible, or always invisible. And based on your clustering, answer this question as to where most of the attributes that you have placed fall under. Once you are on menti.com, and the code, just so I know, because sometimes it's difficult to juggle, is 25613806. 25613806. And the tool is quite wonderful because you'll be able to see live as the response, which actually, I hope it doesn't prejudice people's still filing their opinions, but you can see live where this exercise is leading us to.
We have 100 plus people, 109 people currently.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got 32 responses.
Great. So we'll wait and I'll repeat that code if anybody still wants it, from menti.com, 25613806.
Okay.
We have about 45 responses. I think we can move on.
Great. So there's one more question based on this exercise. So when you found that the largest cluster existed at a certain space on that spectrum for you, were you surprised by that clustering, or did it emerge as expected? Again, based on your exercise and what you've just completed.
Okay. That's interesting.
Probably we'll give it 30 more seconds. We have close to 40 responses. I think we can proceed.
Okay.
Great, great. Now, if I can just give you a brief background, and then we can take this forward. I had developed this sort of assessment tool, crude as it is, because the spectrum is not really very specific, and it is difficult to assess specificity in terms of identity attributes and where they lie along that spectrum based on individuals. But this was developed when I was doing work with helping faculties at universities in the US become acquainted better with the diversity in their classrooms. And this was back in the mid-1990s. And it struck me as I was seeing the answers coming through here that, back in the 90s, first of all, a lot of these issues of identity and stuff was still in germination. And I'm also, we're with an audience today that has done a lot of work on these issues of inclusivity and inclusion and diversity. And so, of course, the answers are going to be a little different. But what's very interesting is that back in the 90s, when we used to do these exercises, largely with faculty members, most of the faculty, and you would think that they would probably have known a little better, thought that all the identity attributes, almost all of them to a T, were almost always visible, that what you saw was what you got. And I think this is good testimony, actually. It's revealed something to me. It's very good testimony that years and years of work on these issues of identity and awareness raising actually leads to change in that very fundamental attitude of understanding that what an individual brings to the table in terms of their identity attributes is very, very much largely under the surface. And so this actually has taught me something here running this exercise today. Rajita, would you like to pitch in here, and then I'll add something about these attributes?
Absolutely. In fact, when I was seeing the responses, two things really struck me. Firstly, with, as you rightly said, with the audience that we have that's so aware and so well informed about the concepts of inclusion, it was in a way, not surprising to see the tallest cluster to be somewhat invisible. But when we looked at the second one, which said there were certain people who said it surprised them, while others said it emerged as expected, I got me thinking that if it has emerged as expected, which is something that you and I will also be a party to, is that, what does that mean when we are in the moment with others? And then, if at that moment we have to gauge how inclusive are we? As you rightly said, the shift has happened. It's a very gradual shift, though.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what has it done in return for how we view people? And so it's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds through our session as we go ahead. But I'm glad we did this in the beginning because, as you said, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's pretty much encapsulating all that we get to see when we look at a stranger walk into a room, as you said.
Yeah, and this is a baseline before we start, because once we start talking about diversity and inclusion, obviously that gives away some of the answers, so to speak, right? And it's also very interesting to note that, let's take the notion of gender, for instance. Back in the 1990s, even in the United States, let alone in many other parts of the world, the issue of, let's say, sexuality from a sort of a non-binary gender perspective or a binary perspective. These were terms that were not even around back then. And I'm talking about as recently as the 1990s. There's been a lot of work done from within those communities in defining their own identities before that could become sort of out in the mainstream. And so much of this work is sort of still happening, will continue to happen. Race is a very interesting one. And if anybody's been following what's happening in the United States right now, there's a big assault from the right on something that's called critical race theory. And critical race theory simply is a legal framework which says that people in society are treated by the institutions based on the biases that exist towards those institutions. That's all it says. So, for instance, the United States, just as one example, gives different levels of penalty to white people and black people for the same crime. So if a white person commits a crime and a black person commits the same crime, the black person is bound to get a much longer and harsher sentence. And critical race theory is trying to sort of undo all this infrastructural, societal, institutional bias. And there's a big assault from the right on that right now. So a lot of these things are constantly in flux. And that makes the work that's being done inside academic institutions, corporations, so much more complicated and complex, because none of this stuff has been sort of settled, so to speak. And I think that we need to keep that in mind as we talk about identity. The other thing to remember about identity and the attributes that people bring, that it's always then translated into power. And that is whether that is the power they feel or don't feel. And this has nothing to do with their position or ranking with an organization. It has to do with their identity. Or whether their identity allows other people to leverage power on them. And so the identity attribute is not just about who they are and what they are, but how they feel within an institutional or an organizational structure based on inclusivity or non-inclusivity.
And I think we'll see a little bit more of that later on after the monologues, because you mentioned United States and the example of whites versus blacks, but in India, it gets typically, as it would, a little more complex, a little more diverse. And I think while that's India's strength, that is where exactly the challenge lies. And you mentioned about things being in influx, Kaiser. I'm sure we have leaders on call today who will agree that a lot has been done, but a lot has not been done yet. In different aspects of these attributes, some work has been done in certain areas, but little has been done in other areas. So it'll be great to see a bit of everything if we can. And I know our two monologues are going to try and address few of these. So I'm really going to request you to set them up for us.
Yes. So just to before I set up the monologues, I just want to explain the theater piece of the work that Rajita and I do. Theater is a very powerful tool at many levels. One, it helps people engage with their empathy. It allows people access into stories in a safe way, where they don't feel implicated, where they don't feel accused. But they get to listen to somebody's story, whether that's fictional or not, and exercise their empathy, exercise their intellect, exercise their judgment. So theater in these kinds of spaces, when we do this work, can take on a multiple roles or even sort of variations in how it's presented. And what I want to just clarify for the audience here today, that we've chosen two monologues today as our sort of examples because we're doing this on a virtual platform. Certainly a monologue is usable even when we're in the physical space together, but in the physical space, we're opened up to in the theater with a lot more diversity of exercises that we could do, which are structured dialogues, structured improvisations, group improvisations that allow the issues then to be brought to the forth and be dissected and understood. So I don't want people leaving here today thinking that the only thing that happens is people do monologues and then that's the theatrical component. There's a multiplicity of ways in which theater can be used. We're just giving you one sort of glimpse into that over here today. So these monologues have been written specifically for today's session. And we often at Sarsha, based on the client's needs, will structure and tailor this work, whether it's monologues or improvisations, to what the client needs. So we've sort of framed these two ones today. The first monologue you're going to be hearing is from one of our actors from our theatre company, Poor Box Productions, Swati Das, who incidentally you can see in a lovely little film on Netflix right now called Skater Girl, I think it's called. So if you're interested. And Swati is going to perform this little monologue here called Between a Rock and a Hard Place. I'm not going to tell you much about what the monologue is about, but as you listen to the monologue and as you hear her tell the story is a fictional story. It's not based on one person, but there's a lot of sort of truth behind the incidents that she will be describing. And so as you're listening to the monologue, just keep an eye out for certain signifiers or indicators about identity, about how identity is dealt with, that you have faced in your work, both as somebody who hires or somebody who has applied and been interviewed for a particular job. So I turn it over now to Swati for a monologue titled Between a Rock and a Hard Place.
Rajita, if you can stop sharing your screen and just request everyone to go on speaker view so that you can see Swati.
Nana. Nana has been my best friend since we were children. We grew up together doing everything exactly the same. Same apartment, same building, same school, same college. Once we even fell in love with the same guy. Thankfully, we wised up. Our friendship survived that awkward little bump in the road. Nana and I both ended up studying marketing and PR. And believe it or not, we both topped our batch with the exact same scores. And then we were recruited by different companies. And for the first time since our childhoods, something fundamentally different happened to each of us. The last 10 years of our friendship has grown even stronger, if that was possible. Our husbands often joke, we think they're jealous, but they say that Nana and I should have gotten married. But yes, whenever I have a problem, I have to admit, I often turn to Nana. Even before I tell my husband. It's not that my husband is not supportive or doesn't understand me. It's just that Nana and I have developed a sort of shorthand. We get to the root of each other's turmoil without wasting much time and without much unnecessary drama. So last month, when I told her about a problem that I was having at work with my boss, I was surprised that for the first time, she wasn't able to help me immediately. I've been working at Gen Natural Cosmetics ever since I graduated. I've done well for myself. It may sound arrogant, but my fast rise in the company to vice president of marketing has ruffled a few feathers. I've been told that when I'm not in the room, I'm referred to as aggressive and as power hungry. Perhaps I am, if that means that I work hard and want to achieve much both for myself and the company. Nana always says that when applied to women, words like aggressive and dominating and power hungry are coded ways of simply calling women like me a bitch, or worse, a feminist. Anyway, I have learned not to let this sort of stuff affect me or get in the way of my work or change the way I work. I remember 2 years ago, I was hauled into HR. One of my department heads had complained about me pushing his team too hard and that I was very aggressive in my tone and approach. HR said that I needed to work on my people skills. So they arranged some coaching for me to address my aggression. Ironically, the day I finished my coaching, news came in that I had delivered some of the best quarterly numbers in our company's history. My boss called me in and congratulated me, and they even threw a small impromptu party in the boardroom. At that little celebration, I couldn't resist. So I said, I am very grateful for all the hard work everyone has put in. In all honesty, I'm not sure I will ever be able to repeat, let alone improve these numbers, as I have just finished my coaching to successfully remove from my being any aggression and hunger for power. But don't look at me like that. I couldn't resist saying all that. Of course, my boss marched me into the office before I could even finish my cake. How could you say something like that? He chastised me. I stood there. I felt my anger rising, but I knew better. I bit my tongue. I took a deep breath and said, I guess I got a bit carried away, but if you think about it, what I meant to say is completely true. What do you mean? He said, still angry at me. Well, when I push my team, I am pulled up for being aggressive. When I get promoted, I am told I am power hungry, which, by the way, no male team leader would ever be pulled up for or told. But that aside, When I make the company happy with numbers and profits, no one thinks that maybe it's my hard work. And yes, even aggressive work ethic, which makes all those things possible. He went silent. I said, I was trying to make a joke about that, but it didn't come out very funny, but it's true. Naina and I, since that incident, we've often laughed about it. She says that I was lucky that that boss of mine took another better paying post in Singapore, or else I was surely headed towards being fired. But I actually miss my boss, especially given his replacement. I'm in a very serious situation and I'm completely lost as to what I should do. For almost 3 months now, this guy Naresh, who heads my digital media team, he's been getting on my every last nerve. Quite frequently, he makes rather off-color jokes during team meetings or even during client presentations. I have pulled him up several times. And then last week, while I was walking past him in the corridor outside the restrooms, he tripped and lunged towards me. As he slid to the floor, he grabbed me near my breasts and on my inner thigh. At first, I did what all of us women have been trained to do since childhood, not to trust our instincts. I gave him the benefit of doubt. But the more I relived that moment, the more it became clear that the way he touched me, the way he grabbed me that day, it was simply not the way a man who was tripping or trying to keep his balance would do. No. And then it happened again, just yesterday. He tripped again. This time it was as he was coming out of our mail room. He used that fall also to grab at me totally inappropriately. Either he's a serial molester or he's got the worst sense of balance of any human I've ever known. So as I always do, I immediately went into my office, I locked the door and I called Naina. She listened patiently as she always does. Apparently, I had not told her that I had a new boss. When I told her his name, she went very quiet for a very long time. I asked her what was wrong. She didn't say much. And then she suddenly said that she had to go and attend a call. She messaged me 3 days later and asked me to meet her at our favorite coffee shop. Naina apologized over coffee and she told me all about my new boss, Neeraj. He had been her boss at Midas Touch, a venture capital firm. Naina said that she had never gotten along with him from day one. She said he was very boorish, very chauvinistic, but he had oodles of charm which allowed him to get away with bloody murder. That is until Naina took him on at Midas Touch. It was almost 10 years ago now, in the wake of the Nirbhaya rape case and the murder case. That horror sent a wave of chills all across the world. Even the corporate world woke up and took notice. From busties to boardrooms, women's safety and ending sexual violence became the most common conversation. Naina said that one day at a meeting of Midas Touch group leaders to strategize new mechanism of women's safety and inclusion, Neeraj said that the easiest solution to avoiding these conflicts and legalities in the workplace was to stop hiring women. Naina said the room was as silent as a graveyard on a windless day. Neeraj tried to pass it off as a joke, but Naina wouldn't let him go. She asked him in front of everyone present to render a written apology, if not his resignation, for such an awful statement. Naina pursued his removal with a singular focus. She argued with anyone willing to listen that a man with views like this could not possibly be a leader of any team, especially ones which included women. Of course, he fought back and tarnished her reputation as being a vengeful bitch and proof of his claim that the workplace would be better off without all this hormonal drama. Midas Touch seemed not interested in any kind of real accountability from Neeraj. So Naina eventually resigned. She said she couldn't live within a corporate ecosystem which didn't take such egregious misogyny seriously. Of course, the story remained buried in the business world because she was forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement as part of her resignation. As Naina and I were ending our coffee meet, Naina said that she had acted weirdly when I had called her because it forced her to relive those awful months in her corporate career. I told her, I remember her telling me this story when it was happening, but I had never put two and two together when a man named Neeraj became my boss. As we said goodbye, Naina said, "Call me if you need anything. I know you will do the right thing." Well, the truth is that I always knew what the right thing to do was, even before I told Naina. But knowing that Neeraj thinks the way he does about women, how will he handle my complaints about Naresh's molestation of me? All of a sudden, I don't feel safe in a place I have given my entire working career to so far. And then, as if to add fuel to the fire, yesterday I found out that Naresh has sort of followed Neeraj wherever he has taken positions. Naina can't be sure, but she vaguely remembers someone named Naresh at Midas Touch. I feel trapped between a rock and a hard place. I know I need to report this. My husband thinks I should leave, but I don't want to. That would be accepting defeat, wouldn't it?
Well, that was a representation and of so many things, of so many instances brought into one monologue. Thank you, Swati. That was brilliantly done. And I have to say that when it comes to theater, there is a certain element of drama to show things, to narrate things, but that's really to draw the message home that for women in varying degrees, less or more, there's always some kind of a discrimination that they deal with. And when we say that, it's not really just a one-way street. There are times when discrimination is also, it comes in forms where if women are being victimized, there are instances where women can victimize. And so it's never really a black and white case. I think that's where diversity and inclusion is such a difficult issue to solve for, that it is never black and white. But when it comes to women, every challenge that society puts forth women tends to be a double-edged sword, because it's not just about difference in competence, in circumstances, in level of responsibilities between home and work, but it's also about gender and appearance. So for women, it just adds to the complexity. And when we've seen one monologue that talks about gender at workplace, let's look at something that only further magnifies the problem when women are on the wrong side of 40s, highly competent, highly driven, ambitious, hardworking. What does the world in the corporates or the business world mean for someone who is on the wrong side of 40s? And frankly, who better to do this monologue for us? Mabanu Modi Kotwal. Mabanu is someone I find very inspiring. I'm very happy to know her, because here's someone who spent her youth studying, being a good student, excelling in various subjects of science, then being a wife, mom, and then eventually rekindling her love for theater in her 40s, and then having a successful career in film, television, theater, and radio. In fact, one of the women I look at and say, I hope that's the kind of future I have. Mabanu, welcome, and all over to you.
We Indians always like to boast about how our myriad cultures and traditions value older people, that we truly, madly, and deeply revere the elderly. We're particularly keen to compare ourselves to Western cultures in that department, believing that all Westerners discard their elderly into nursing homes or elder care communities, isolated from family, friends, and real life itself. We secretly believe we treat our soiled tissue paper better. We teach our children to show respect to the elders by touching their feet. Of course, older or not, we touch the feet of every sundry politician, movie star, cricket player, and television celebrity. Frankly, I have never been one much in favor of this custom. I'm not even sure that all this foot touching is an indicator of us truly revering the elderly. All this genuflecting and falling at people's feet may be more about our own cultural subservience as a people, but that's a whole other discussion for another day. What I do know is that the business world, the workforce, has little patience or need for anyone past a certain age. And if you're an aging woman in the corporate world, then the sense of disposability and exclusion rises exponentially. Just like in Hollywood and Bollywood, while most menopausal men still woo and arthritically gyrate with heroines young enough to be their granddaughters, female stars past 35 cannot find viable roles, let alone actresses past 50 being allowed to romance boys with six-packs and their own heads of hair. Of course, it's not without reason that the corporate world in specific and the world at large in general seems to have very little room for us as we age. Most of the stuff we buy these days has built-in obsolescence. Things are built to last only a very limited lifespan. Then it stops working or disintegrates and has to be replaced. I remember the first refrigerator my grandmother bought lasted her 48 years. That thing was built like a tank and cooled like the winds of Serbia. We live in a world where anything even 2 minutes new is already really, really old. Newer models of the same product come out more regularly than the seasons change. And even if we don't really need a new gadget or wardrobe, our obsession with the latest, the shiniest, overrules all else. No wonder then that in this world of built-in obsolescence and obsession with the new, our attitudes about objects have begun to spill over into our attitudes about humans. The older humans are also no longer valuable, easily replaceable, and long past expiry of user date. When it comes to the latest objects and possessions, our age is perpetually chanting, buy, buy, buy. And when it comes to the elderly, this same culture seems unable to wait to bid us buy, buy, buy. And nowhere did this become more clear than at my last job interview. The way the manager interviewed me, you'd have thought a purple-colored two-horned unicorn was sitting in front of him. I've worked in the corporate world for almost 40 years. 3 years ago, I had to take a leave of absence from my post as VP of accounts at a very large media conglomerate. My second husband was diagnosed with prostate cancer. We were told he'd be okay, so as we had caught it early, I was expected to be gone from work for 6 months or more. Just as I was ready to come back to work, we thought my husband was in the clear. We learned that his kidneys had started to fail again. I took another 6 months leave of absence. The company fought me tooth and nail to get me to retire. I had no interest in that. They reluctantly agreed to extend my leave of absence. Eventually, at the end of 1 year, I was nowhere able to go back to work. My husband started dialysis and needed even more care. He was put on a waiting list for an organ transplant. Work called one day and said they had to let me go. They said that they had already started a search for my replacement. I wanted to fight to keep that job after everything I had done for the company. But I was physically and mentally exhausted. I was already fighting on enough fronts. Almost 3 years to the date since his diagnosis, my husband's kidneys collapsed waiting for a donor. After the cremation, I came home, and for the first time in my life, I was the only one there. My friends and relatives all told me to take it easy, go on a holiday, maybe even officially retire. I couldn't stand the empty house, and more so, I couldn't stand the idea that I'd have to take up knitting or cross-stitch to keep myself busy. So I brushed the cobwebs of my resume, started making calls, and lined up a few interviews. At the first one I had about 3 weeks ago, when I entered the room, the interviewer's head did a double turn. She just stared at me. I asked her if everything was okay. Oh, it's nothing, she said. It's just that you sounded much more younger on the phone. I wanted to say, well, you sounded much smarter on the phone. But I knew better. So I pretended to laugh off her ill-chosen words and joked, obviously you're not a poker player, or if you do play, you must lose heavily. She replied with a, huh? Obviously, she didn't understand my implication that her face had revealed everything she was thinking about me based on her assumptions about my age. I was completely stunned by her saying that I sounded much younger on the phone. Was she saying that had she known I was older, that she might not have called me in? The rest of the interview was awkward all the way through. I got up, thanked her, and actually I felt a bit sorry for her. She too would become older if she was lucky enough to. How would she handle her own aging, I wondered. A few days later, in the next interview, this young man who thought he was a super hotshot spoke to me throughout the interview as though I were a slightly feeble child with only half a brain. He had picked up this awful American twang during his MBA studies at Wharton, which made him positively unbearable. Condescension dripped off his tongue with every sentence. Do you even know what Insta is? He asked. I said I did, but wanted to know what that had to do with the position I was applying for. Well, he said, just trying to gauge how tech savvy you are. It's like the world will leave you behind if you're not fluid, like, with Insta, WhatsApp, FB, and Twitter. And here we expect everyone to have ultra tech proficiency. Sometimes I wish real life had a swipe left function where you could just get rid of that idiot sitting right in front of you with the flick of your wrist. No such luck. This guy was testing my every last ounce of patience and politeness. I half expected him at any moment to break out of character and say, just kidding, I was just testing your patience, seeing how long it took for you to use the F word. But no, he carried on in this supercilious way, trying to educate me about all the newfangled technologies. It's also obvious he had not read my CV. Had he done so, he would have seen that my early career had been in a time before commercial software, and that we had to write our own code to fulfill certain tasks on our computers. As I left, I did say this. I said, even though the position I'm applying for doesn't require it, I have an Insta following of over 2 lakh people. If you need any advice on how to increase your 1,000-odd followers, please feel free to contact me. I'd done my homework. I wondered if there's still any place left for me in the corporate world. I think I was a bit spoiled in my early and mid-career. Never having had children, I didn't experience what so many women do. These women have to take leave to have children. So many never come back to the workforce, and those that do return having lost time and even seniority and promotability. I'm now learning all this better in my advanced career about what happens to women, especially older women, who still disproportionately have to juggle the burdens of home and work-life demands. I know that we are still better off than 40 years ago when there was mandated ages for retirement. My father had to retire at the age of 59, no exception whatsoever. Others in that generation at 61. But whether it was one's late 50s or early 60s, retirement was a fait accompli. I'm glad we don't live in a world like that anymore. But I feel that the whole official policies in many companies do not allow age discrimination in hiring. The coded practices and subterfuges are a completely different matter. Look, I'm not saying that I should be hired because I'm old and automatically come with some nuanced wisdom and intrinsic value based on my age. All I'm saying is that if I'm the best for the job, no matter what my age, that I should not be brushed aside because of my age. So I'm not giving up, not yet. I have a few more interviews lined up in the next few weeks. I'm sure there is someone more enlightened out there who will see my value, my potential, and hire me. Till then, at these interviews so far, I have found myself constantly saying to myself, as the young ones would proclaim, WTF.
I've been reading the chat and I agree. I've been laughing and crying both at the same time. So many pertinent, topical issues have been brought forward by Ma Banu. And absolutely important for all of us to understand that knowingly or unknowingly, in the flow of interaction, in the heat of the moment of doing multiple things at the same time at our workplaces, we become party to so many such instances, behaviors. And every such instance, every such behavior is actually furthering wrong message. And so, therefore, what does inclusion mean? Inclusion is not always about an activity to be done at an organizational level. It's about every individual. What do we think? How do we act? What position or stand do we take in matters where it ultimately boils down to personal choice? Welcome back, Kaiser.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts? I absolutely love both the monologues.
Thank you. So just to get back to the notion about the use of theatre, I'm sure there were a lot of people in the audience putting on their sort of right brain thinking, well, that's too much, or that's irrational, or that's illogical. The idea of these is not about that. The idea is about them, it is for them to spring up the feelings and thoughts that you have, not only about what you've experienced, but how you would handle the situations were you in those shoes. And also to understand, as Rajita said in introducing these monologues, that these issues of identity attributes that people bring to the table are so complex and so interwoven. So, when we talk about gender, it's impossible to separate a person's gender from their age, from their family background, from their education, because all those forces have shaped that person's gender. So what people bring to the table in terms of identity is not only complex to begin with, just based on what identity is, but the fact that identity in an individual is shaped by the culture and society around us, including the places we work. People's identities become shaped by the places they work at. And so how do we negotiate these very complicated ideas? And to come back to the real bottom line of all of this, diversity and inclusion work is important, not only because we want a better world, but because we know that the more inclusive a workplace is, the happier and more productive that workplace is going to be. So ultimately, this is about the bottom line, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about over here. But we have to understand what it takes to get to that place. And so these monologues are just a springboard into those discussions. And I hope in a safe way where people don't feel implicated or, I do have to say that that Nirbhaya incident is based on an actual conversation I had with the head of HR at a very, very large multinational. And the head of HR was a woman. And she said, I was sitting there and I couldn't believe what I was hearing from the men in the organization, that we need to just stop hiring women and then all this would go away, this sexual harassment, this violence against women in the workplace, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, in fact, Kaizad, I was also going to say that for individuals who might have felt during the two monologues that, maybe situations are not so intense in real life, that in itself is a bias because so often women don't speak up.
Right.
And the other thing is that is also a coping mechanism because the first step is denial. And quite often it is important to turn around and say, where are these instances and monologues stemming from? Are there women outside who possibly face such things? Yeah. So I think that is really the bigger objective of us bringing such theater to people who are not necessarily sitting here for entertainment, but for building awareness by way of seeing the drama of it.
Right. And I think, Rajita, it's also important to know that, one of the socializations that women have, and I think Indian culture in general, is that we're constantly trying to please everybody.
Yes.
Because pleasing is a way into being liked. and everybody wants to be liked. Who doesn't want to be liked? But we often do that at the cost of our own peace, our inner harmony, our productivity. Because if you're constantly biting down on your tongue to please somebody who has power over you,
yep.
You're not at your productive best. You're not at your happiest. You're not wanting to give back what you are capable of giving back. And so again, these are very complex issues. Rajita, shall we talk a little bit about the various ways we can look at identity and identity theory?
We have to, but in a moment, let's just invite Nikita to run the poll question we have that very nicely takes us to the identity theory and the social identity theory.
Yes. So what we'd like for you to do is look at this poll question, this spectrum again over here, and not really a spectrum, but multiple forces, that what influenced your worldview on identity attributes, all the ones that we started this session with and talking about, from age to gender to marital status, to urban versus rural, to economic affluence, to culture, to religion, etc. What has shaped those views?
And the code is on the screen,
Yes,
25613806. You can just go on menti.com and type in your responses. We can give it 20 more seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So the preponderance of answers fall in all of the above, so that family, education, religious influences, cultural influences, the media have all affected or all affect our views on identity. And I think there are many other influences that we could have mentioned here as well. So Rajita, over to you for a bit.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting. Media is not being picked up, which is understandable, because for a lot of us, the influences are much closer home. And Kaisa, this brings us to the point that you were saying earlier, that let's look at why we wanted to look at how we define our lens to view the world is really something that we want to discuss from an identity theory and social identity theories perspective. But before that, and this is not an exhaustive list by all means, really our preferences of what we like, who we like, how do we like people or things, how do we identify with ourselves, our families, our belief systems, all of these actually do define and influence the way we view the world. And of course, all of us in varying degree carry the bias of saying, I don't have a bias. But moment we allow our preferences or our identity to filter who we think is like us, who we think is not like us, we are being biased. So almost every one of us has, and I don't have a bias. So I think as individuals in a society, in an organization, in a team, in a workplace, it's extremely important to remain aware of instances where we might be dismissing things by saying, oh no, I don't have a bias. I'm fairly open-minded. Well, not really. One might need to go a little deeper than that. And the other interesting aspect that Kaizad had touched upon in the beginning was the power dynamics. Because moment you are a part of an inner circle, you're likely to feel powerful, immaterial of what position you hold in the hierarchy of your organization. But if you're not a part of an inner circle, that's when you start wondering, why am I so powerless? And the interesting aspect of how this can be understood from an individual's perspective is in the tenets of identity theory and social identity theory. And the reason we are really trying to look at these is because when social identity theory looks at groups, it looks at groups of people that are similar and therefore they cluster together. And in those similar people are individuals who are looking at the roles they play. And therefore, what is the power they have to control the resources they need to play those roles? So there's quite an interdependent formation or evolution of one's identity. Bottom line, human beings are social beings. So even their identity evolves from constant juggling of inside out and outside in. And what that leads to is that there is a certain system in which people tend to create categorization, that my inner circle or my inner group are individuals who are like me or who are like what I want to be or what I like to believe I am. And people who are not like that are not a part of that inner circle. They are in the outer group, so as to say. And invariably, humanly, we end up saying my inner group is better than the outer group. And so everything is viewed in contradiction in a binary form. So what that leads to is that in itself, we are dismissing and defying the concepts of inclusion. So every time we meet someone, I think the first choice, a very conscious choice we have to make is that the more we want to be more social and accepting, we need to start understanding that not everyone is going to be relatable. Not everyone is going to be a person I can find a bit of myself in. And that's really where empathy then starts playing a huge role. Kaizad and I decided to bring the concepts of identity theory and social identity theory to this conversation because we believe that when we understand that all the aspects of bias, all the aspects of wanting to be with like-minded people or wanting to be with people we can relate to or understand or see a bit of ourselves in is a very human instinct. And therefore, the choice of being inclusive is also highly individual. But when done this way, it's likely to then percolate into our conversations, our language use, our behaviors, the positions we take with people, and only then is it likely to have a dominoes effect to the collective. But one cannot have either or. I can't address the collective and expect the individual to change. Or I can't just talk to an individual and expect the entire collective to change. And so that's where the tenets of these two theories, while never having been researched together, have tremendous overlap and interdependencies that we can further utilize to build conversations around in organizations that truly want to be inclusive. Because ultimately, being inclusive is an individual's choice. Kaizad, your
Correct.
thoughts?
Yeah. So I think that it's a couple of things I just want to add to that. That, when we talk about power dynamics and power struggles are not always felt vertically.
No.
Sometimes they can be felt laterally. So
Absolutely.
even within groups who occupy the same sort of social or corporate pecking order, so to speak, there are power dynamics that play based on identity and inclusivity. So I think sometimes we tend to think that, this idea of power and marginalization is just top to bottom, sort of stuff that happens because that's what top to bottom structures do. But a lot of this also, and especially depending on how the top creates the environment, you can have a lot of conflict at the lateral levels that have nothing to do with the top-down approach.
Not at all.
The other thing about bias that's very interesting, and I think the I don't have a bias, is very interesting, because there was a wonderful study done in the United States in the mid-80s and early 90s, which found that in a classroom, and I'm talking about school level, so primary, middle, and high school, that boys were called on more than girls to answer questions. That was, I mean, you didn't have to do a study to know that. But what was really interesting is that even the female teachers called upon the boys to answer questions more than the girls. Now that's that I don't have a bias. You can't have a better example, because no woman would think that I don't like my own tribe, right? I'm sort of have a bias against my own tribe. And so how these things work through, how they manifest themselves, is again a very complicated process. One last note on identity theory and social identity theory. Because we know that our biases are structures created by the influences around us. In essence, they become learned behaviors. Learned behaviors either by what we're taught, what somebody said at a party, in the family, at church, in the temple, at work, whatever. The wonderful thing about that, like any learned behavior, is that it can be unlearned.
Yes.
And that unlearning is what can happen by understanding identity theory, social identity theory, and how those two kind of they don't lay on top, they really kind of start intersecting like this matrix.
Yes.
And how you unlearn, how you unentangle your biases from that matrix is really the work of diversity and inclusion. And
Absolutely.
so, yeah.
No, absolutely, because if one was to study the identity theory a little, one sees that the instinctive approach of processing anything new for every individual is to constantly go verify if their beliefs and behaviors are in norm with the popular, or are in norm with their inner circle behavior. And that validation is so important in constantly feeding and reinforcing one's identity. And so therefore, when one wants to be more diverse and inclusive, one is trying to step away from the norm. And that's something one has to accept, which is also where possibly the initial conversation that corporates have done, societies have done, is that talk more about it, normalize it, so that it becomes a part of norming. And then maybe it'll have higher levels of acceptability. And so that's really where our lens to view the world, while it's a part of how humans have evolved, will continue to evolve, but then certain conscious choices of how I want to be inclusive is also actually a huge projection of one's leadership. How I lead myself, and how therefore I want to project myself onto others, and how I want to lead others.
Yeah. And one other thing, Rajita, that's very important to understand, that when we talk about biases and how those are put out in the situations that we find ourselves in, oftentimes people find themselves a little bit sort of bifurcated, because privately they may believe that, I'm just going to use an example, that all people are equal. It's a very broad example. But in the culture they find themselves in order to survive in that culture, they may choose not to express that because that would ruffle feathers, or they may choose to take the very opposite position because that's what's expected of them in order to keep their membership in that tribe. And so you find this a lot in studies about bullying, where people, bullies don't necessarily believe what they act out, but in order to maintain status as a bully, because that's what is expected, they have to take the opposite kind of view. And so again, what we see is not often what you get.
Absolutely. In fact, both in Swati's monologue and Mabano's monologue, we could see that. For example, in Swati's monologue, her husband said, quit. It's literally you're saying, look the other way, but don't really declare war on that person. In Mabano's case, if there was someone who was let's say Ma Banu's character was facing multiple people, multiple interviewers panel for that interview, and there was someone who felt, no, I really find this person very dynamic and driven. I'd like to consider hiring her. But what are the chances that that person would speak up against two interviewers who were like the one Ma Banu experienced? So we
Correct.
see a lot of these instances happening in the corporates, and that's really where we keep saying that being inclusive is a firm individual belief, and an individual choice to act out. And then therefore, how do you multiply it as a dialogue, use it as a language, so that there is that much more ripple effect, and a positive one at that, on the teams, and then therefore the organization's culture, and eventually society's culture. And I think we've been receiving a lot of chats. Nikita, do you want us? Okay, all right. If there's anything people would like to ask and talk about, I think we should, Kaizad, open it up for Q&A.
Yes, I think we have one. Yes, we open up for Q&A, and then we have one more little exercise at the end.
Yes, and I've just put some questions here for the audience for personal reflection. You've seen the monologues, you've heard Kaizad and I have a conversation around certain aspects. So really, what aspect or practice of inclusion do you see evidently present or absent from your organization? And this is something you can either share with us if you'd like to, or think to just yourselves. But what's more important is, what does it tell you about your ecosystem? What does it tell you in terms of, are people herding into popular groupthink, or do you see certain crusaders in your organization? And if you do see certain crusaders, how are they being responded to? How are they being received? And of course, beyond that, Kaizad and I are happy to answer your questions. So we'd really like to open the webinar room, so as to say, for all of you.
And if people want to ask their questions in person, just unmute your mic and your camera, turn your camera on, or you can even put your questions in the chat, and maybe Nikita can help us with that.
Yeah, we can either raise your hand and we can unmute your line, or you can type your questions on the chat.
Just for this Q&A, I'm not sharing the screen, Nikita. We'll be happy to answer.
Sure.
I could unmute myself. I'm Padmaja. I work with Titan. Just an observation. Kaizad, you said that no woman would want to go negative on their own tribe, so to say. You're surprised at the number of women who actually put women down.
I'm sorry. What I was saying is that no woman would like to think that she would go against her own. It's again, my experiences in America, when we talk about racism, as soon as a person says, I'm not racist because I have a black friend, is the exact moment that you know that person has a problem.
Yeah, you're totally right.
with race. And so I'm sorry if I miscommunicated that. I was saying that
nobody,
like for myself, I would like to think that I'm not biased against I'm not built that way, but I'd like to think I'm not biased against my own tribe, whatever that means. So I think a lot of people come with that bias, but clearly that's not the case at all. Clearly. But you're right. I mean, what explains mothers-in-law who pressure their daughters for dowry, right?
Exactly.
I mean, what explains that? So exactly, you're absolutely right, ma'am. Absolutely.
Yeah, in fact, even in corporates, I would say, going by certain past personal experiences, that I have found more support with male leaders than women leaders I've had. So I know that, and that's exactly what I was saying after Swati's monologue, that it's not as black and white. It's highly complex, because if there is a larger representation of women as victims, there is enough number of women who can victimize without batting an eyelid. So it's not as black and white. It's certainly more complex. But I think the first step towards inclusion, the first step towards normalizing the rare occurrences and creating a platform for it to come out in the open, is to talk, is to be open in one's worldview of how things can occur. It's important to have a platform where any conversation should be acceptable.
Yeah, and there are some very interesting, again, markers that have changed over time. But when women started to enter the corporate force in higher positions, they've always been part of the corporate world, but when they started to get into higher positions, very interesting things started to happen, and particularly in the West. This didn't happen in India, and I think India should be very happy about that. Women, to a T almost, started to chop off their hair. They started to wear pantsuits, as though showing up in a Laura Ashley floral dress as vice president would diminish their masculinity within that space. So there are so many ways in which people's identities are constantly being chopped off in order to fit in. And that metaphor for women has been real in many cases, right? Feet used to be bound together in cultures. Feet used to be tied together. Ribs have been removed to fit into corsets. Toes have been chopped off to fit into pointed stilettos as recently as the 1990s. And so that chopping off of identity is an extension of the chopping off of body parts to fit in. And so the corporate world saw a lot of that. India resisted that. And I don't know that we necessarily resisted it for the right reasons, but we resisted it. Most of our females in higher positions were still wearing saris. That comes with its own baggage, but that's a whole different issue, right? But this is exactly it. This is how complicated these social markers and issues of identity are.
Yeah. In fact, having said that, we have to understand that there are multiple things that will show up as areas of inclusion that are actually not being addressed at all. I mean, gender and age are still being socialized and spoken of, but there are people who have health issues, who need certain altered lifestyles. They come with the same competence, but not necessarily the same stamina, would require flexibility. There are people who would come in with mental health issues. We are talking of individuals who may look the same on the outside, but may come with certain needs. How much are we accommodating those needs? How much are we talking about those needs? How much are we addressing the insecurities that come with those needs? So diversity and inclusion is a vast topic. We picked up the two that we thought would be the beginning of such conversations, but there are many more to be done.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Physical health, mental health are two issues Indian organizations are vastly giving a closed eye to, because these are two areas where one can make systemic changes by way of policy change, by becoming more flexible, more acceptable, just like we've taken baby steps for addressing gender issues, setting up POSH committees, giving better maternity leaves, paternity leaves. But we similarly need to be making policy decisions around accommodating people who come back to work with health issues, mental or physical, particularly for the fact that on the wrong side of 40s, people are more susceptible to physical ailments.
Yeah, tell me about it. I'm 55 and everybody calls me ma'am in office. And if you feel like telling them, don't.
Exactly.
But doesn't mean you need to call me ma'am, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
So individual identity doesn't diminish with age. It's such a simple fact, but it gets complex because people come with cultural baggages of how do I address someone who's so-called elder to me. So there are multiple reasons, and not always are all the reasons bad. So we are not trying to call diversity a problem. We are saying inclusion is the need of the young.
Need of it. Yeah, very true.
Diversity is a fact of life. I mean, it's just, there's nothing you can do about it. And, to add a little to what you said, Rajita, with the tier 2 and tier 3 city folk entering the workforce and the multinationals and the global, previously the multinationals were sort of for the sort of elite of not only just South Bombay, but the very elite of certain metropolises. And now it's completely different. And what those people bring to the work culture and their insecurities about fitting in with these people, from the urban areas who come with certain attitudes towards people from tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So there is so much work. I feel that D&I has just begun its journey in both academia and the corporate world. And the sad thing is, and I must say this, that sometimes when you make progress in these areas, there's going to be a backlash. Because some people are going to have to start sharing their power. They're going to have to start sharing the space in an inclusive way. And we're seeing that already. We're seeing that already in many, many parts of the world, as well as institutions.
Absolutely. In fact, on that note, because we are running short of time, I think there's one question which is our final poll question. Nikita, if you can bring it forward. I think this is a good note on which we can not just close this session, but leave you with some thought. And I know we've had such capable, competent people in the audience that maybe just that one little nudge might give you some ideas on what do you want to take back with you to your family and to your workplace and to your society in general. So, what is the most needed practice you would want to see your organization embrace during the ongoing pandemic? And I see a lot of people already answering.
And yeah, I just wanted to just call out while you're responding, in case there are any other questions, we can probably take one more question while people are responding to this question. And we'll
Certainly.
request you all to just stay on for 2-3 minutes after the session ends as well. Smita, who is the NHRD Bangalore chapter, has also joined us and would want to share some things. So just stay on, and in case you have any questions, you can probably take one question. And
I think MP Rishi is raising the hand.
Yeah. Good evening. I'm the professor in Bangalore. I was wondering, with this identity, when you are speaking so much, as far as the corporate is concerned with this pandemic, now lots of corporates are believing that, the work from home is a better option. But as I understand as a professional, they need to take little risk and make sure that at least 50% of the corporates will be working in the office. And I don't know how you would put it straight to the corporate, because you're all with the corporate. I'm a professional, I'm an academician, but I feel you are raping the academic, the home environment, and there are lots of issues which are going on at home, and their mental stability is totally out, and so many things are happening at home, though they don't speak because they need the salary. So in the light of that, now since vaccination is almost done with the people plus 45, and vaccination is also available, if 1 crore people can be vaccinated in one day in India, it's a great success. So why don't the corporates can think in terms of opening their offices and put all these employees in the office, or 50% of the employees of the office? Why I raise this question is the identity crisis is going on. Can you call him as a professional employee, or he's still at home and doing all his domestic and the professional work, where we find extremely difficult to understand the complexities of the work and the complexities of the domestic work. I would like to have some opinion from your side, sir.
Yes, Mr. Rishikesh, it's a very timely and interesting question. As far as what the corporates do down the road with the employees coming back to work 50% or more, or even 100% again, I think it's a little too early to understand that. Partly because even though our vaccination drives have improved, I just read today somewhere that in terms of the second dose, only 16% of Indians have been vaccinated with both doses. With one dose, 3.6% with both doses, and 16% with at least one dose. So we're way off in terms of the herd immunity numbers, which I think will influence corporates calling people back into the workspace. So I think it's a little early. We're still not sure when that third wave is coming, and if after the third wave there's going to be a fourth and a fifth wave, as was predicted. So I think the corporates are rightly, I think, in my opinion, playing it cautious right now. But you raise amazingly pertinent questions about the work-life balance and about people's mental statuses right now. And actually, that's what Hrd Network and Rajita and I have been focusing on in our last year. It kind of came about, obviously, completely by accident. But the idea of working with people in these COVID times on how to deal with these mental health care issues, on how to deal with one's well-being, given that so much of it is still so uncertain as to when people will be coming back to the offices. And the same is true of academia. You said you're a professor. So, when universities will be back at 100% capacity, our classrooms, our schools, it's a little early, I think, for that. Maybe by end of this year, early next year, we'll have a better picture. Rajita?
I know, I completely agree with you. In fact, I'm sure Nikita will agree that we are in a topic that can go on. And frankly, one thing I will definitely say is that we completely acknowledge accept, and I will confess, at least personally for me, I have had my days of going through challenges of psychological and mental fatigue. We're all sailing the same boat. We all have good days, bad days. Unfortunately or fortunately, there's no quick fix to this problem. And neither is there a clear solution to this problem. But what I will say is that communication and conversation with people will at least give you some breathing space to know you're not alone in it. And that is what we can offer through our team, through us, through associations like NHRDN, through people like Nikita and others. I think it's important to just pick the phone and speak, because every psychological and mental issue only intensifies in isolation. And that's one thing we will say, do not practice. But besides that, I don't think Kaizad and I can offer an immediate quick fix to this. However, I know we are running short of time. We've gone over time. So, Nikita, I'm going to hand it over to you. But thank you so much for being such amazing attendees, asking questions, sharing your views. I might not have addressed all views and all questions. Nikita, I'm happy to take this on at another opportune time. I know so will Kaizad be. Kaizad?
Yeah. I just one last statement before. Mr. Rishikesh raised some very good issues. What's happened again, and this sort of brings things full circle a little bit, is that women have, in unprecedented numbers, exited the workforce during the COVID pandemic. Employment levels of women in the United States now are at 1984 levels. 1984. All that work done in the last 40 years to increase women's participation, to bring more women into the workforce as equal players, has almost, not all of it, but a lot of it has vanished. And these challenges are going to continue as we adjust to this pandemic, so that these ideas of work and home balance could not be brought into more sharper focus than during these lockdowns and this pandemic. So Nikita, thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Rajita and Kaizad. I'm so happy that we hosted you today. And just looking at the comments on the chat, and I'm sure you've all seen that, I think people have loved the session. Personally, for me as well, I think there has been a lot of revelation. I think a lot of awareness. I think this topic, I think we can go on for hours. I know we had this strict timeline of 90 minutes, so we need to wrap up, but more than happy to bring you back for like a follow-up conversation to know more about it. I think the monologues, it just made it so real, and the two topics, the gender and the ageism bit, I think both I'm personally very, very attached to, and I definitely feel there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But thank you so much. I would have loved to say many more things, but in the interest of time, I would just wrap it here and hand it over to Smita, who's our NHRD Bangalore president, and also she's the CHRO of AstraZeneca, for the closing comments. And while I invite her, I've also shared a feedback link, and I'll share it again. Would love to hear your feedback. If you can just type in there and share your feedback. I'm sure Rajita and Kaizad would also love to, hear back from you. So with that, I'll hand it over to Smita. Smita, you're there?
Yes. Can you see me?
Yes. I will just stop sharing screen.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think I'm visible. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kaizad and Rajita. I think that was a wonderful session, looking at the responses and everything. Very clearly, people have enjoyed. And one of the things we do is, if there are more questions, we can filter them to you. One, and second, of course, is have a follow-up in a few months that, in the form of either a workshop or another session like this, whatever makes sense, both for the members and for yourselves.
And people can connect with us on our webpage and LinkedIn. Sorry, by the way, just in case they have follow-up they'd like to get.
Certainly. Have you shared that with us? Then we can certainly post it off over here.
I think Nikita has that.
Yeah.
Perfect. We can do that then, for sure. Yep, that would work. All right. With that, I wanted to thank all of you for dialing in today for our monthly meeting. This is probably going to be the last monthly meeting hosted by this executive committee. And we are really, really excited that 2 years has been really fast, quick. We've had a fantastic time, seamlessly pivoting to digital without missing a single month. We've continued with all our offerings, learning programs, thought leadership meetings every month, our certification programs, the student programs that we did. All of it very quickly pivoted. We didn't lose a single day. And I think even our programs like the showcase, the big ones, I think even all of them pivoted, our learning programs, certification programs, everything. So it's been very exciting and huge support from all of you members. And of course, our YABs, our NHRD ambassadors, our volunteers, and the seniors who have been guiding us through all of this. So thank you so much. We will be having our AGM soon. And there will also be the election of the new committee. You will be receiving, those of you who are members will be receiving the details of all of that. So I will be seeing you all over there again. But I just wanted to, take this moment to thank everybody, as this is our last monthly meeting with this EC. Thank you so much for all your support. We've really had fun, and I think we will continue because we are still members of the network. So we will continue to work with you and connect with you in a different capacity.
And we have some people here, so I'll request some, whoever is available, the executive committee members, if you can just come on video and I'll add you on the spotlights. This is our last monthly meet. So would love to see all of you. I see Balaji. Okay, let me just add the spotlight. I think Ronnie is also there. Yeah.
He's on.
Yeah. Great. Rajita, I think we'll take one photo with you and then, we'll take one photo. I think.
Then Kaisa, then I will be happy to leave and you.
Yes.
No, you can be there. That's absolutely fine.
I mean, at the end of the day, this is your, as you said, the last session after a long 2 years.
But just wanted to keep it open if anyone wants to share anything from the executive committee. It's, we can take a minute.
Well, allow Kaizad and me to take your leave. It's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so very much.
Yes, thank you very
so
much.
Rajita,
Hope to see you all in the future. Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, so I'll just add to what Smita has said. It's been great. And thank you all for supporting us. And anyways, we'll see you at the AGM, all the members. It's on the 17th. And we will also have the next monthly meet on the last Thursday of July. So we hope all of you will join that so that you can support the new committee when they come on board too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Look forward to catching all of you at the AGM, and do remember to participate in the elections if you are a member. We'll see you again in the next monthly meeting in a different capacity with a new EC. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.